research may dispel a current belief about the rate of global warming. We'll explore how scientists are using an unexpected marine organism to refine climate projections. Plus, ever since the Houthi rebels in Yemen started attacking vessels in the Red Sea, the global shipping industry has been disrupted. We'll take a look at the impact the conflict is having on the environment. And carbon pollution takes a dip in the U.S., according to a new report. But is it enough to meet the country's pledge to cut emissions in half by 2030? We'll have more on that study. Hello and welcome to EarthX News, where we focus on sustainability and the environment. I'm Christina Thompson. Let's get into some of the biggest headlines facing our planet. The Earth's average temperature passed a key threshold for the first time. According to the European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service, the planet had 12 consecutive months of temperatures of 1.5 degrees hotter than the pre-industrial era for the first time on record. The EU Climate Monitor also showed these extremes continuing into 2024, with the first month of the year being recorded as the warmest January on record. The findings come as scientists warn passing the 1.5 degree benchmark could trigger tipping points that could further endanger the environment. Scientists widely consider 2023 to be the hottest recorded year in history, with storms, droughts, and fires being likely contributors to rising temperatures. A study of sea sponges yields some surprising results about the rate of rising global temperatures. Scientists from the University of Western Australia Oceans Institute analyzed samples of sclerosponge skeletons found in the Eastern Caribbean. Their findings, published in Nature Climate Change, suggest the Earth may have already passed 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming in 2020, and a 2 degrees Celsius rise could be possible by the end of the decade. Scientists say the study of 300 years of ocean temperature records preserved within the sponge's skeletons also indicated that the pre-industrial period can be defined by stable temperatures from 1700 to 1790 and from 1840 to 1860, with the gap defined by cooling related to volcanic activity. The current period of time commonly used to define the pre-industrial level is 1850 to 1900. The sea sponges went on to reveal that warming related to human activity commenced with the mid-1860s, with clear emergence by the mid-1870s, about 80 years before the period indicated by instrumental sea surface records. Amos Winter, a co-author of the study, praised the marine organism's ability to record ocean temperatures. Listen.
I mean, the sponges really are the heroes of this story, because without them, we'd have no story. It's like putting a thermometer into the ocean at that time. And, so temperature versus time, it's just a beautiful thing.
The sclerosponge is a long-lived species that records chemical changes in its calcium carbonate skeleton, serving as a natural archive of ocean temperatures. That's according to the study. While limiting global temps to 1.5 degrees Celsius has been the gold standard for climate action under the framework of the Paris Agreement, researchers say the findings may have implications for current projections of global warming. New studies are underway. A team in Japan is looking into Okinawan sponges to compare their findings to the Australian team. The Department of Energy finalized its new rule regulating kitchen appliances like the gas stove. It's less strict than previous versions that were released to the public, and that's because Republicans and centrist Democrats were worried about the rule being too far-reaching. More conservative voices, including former President Donald Trump, argued the regulations could increase utility bills for consumers over 30 years. The final rule is expected to affect only 3% of gas stove models and 23% of electric stoves on the market. Now, for reference, previous versions of the proposed bill would have impacted about half of the gas stove models on the market. The finalized rule is expected to take effect in 2028. Supporters say it is projected to amount to $1.6 billion in savings for consumers' utility bills over 30 years. The DOE says the new standards will decrease carbon emissions by approximately 4 million metric tons cumulatively over the same time span, roughly equivalent to the emissions associated with the energy use of 500,000 households. A new report finds U.S. greenhouse gas emissions fell in 2023. After 2 years of increases, emissions dropped by 1.9%. That's according to new estimates from the Rhodium Group. The nonpartisan research provider says the year-on-year decline is because of emissions reductions in the U.S. power sector, which fell by 8% in the last 12 months, as well as building emissions, which saw a 4% drop in the same period. Now, the drop in power sector emissions comes as the U.S. continues to move away from coal-fired power plants, transitioning to cleaner and renewable sources of energy. Rhodium Group also found the 2023 emissions reduction is the largest single-year decline the U.S. has seen since 2016 and marks a whopping 17.2% decline in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 2005 levels. But keep in mind, those reductions, they're still well below the country's climate target set up under the Paris Agreement, which aims for a 50 to 52% emissions reduction by 2030. The U.S. meatpacking industry is pushing back against proposed EPA standards to help reduce water pollution from slaughterhouses. The EPA's guidelines would require slaughterhouses to install, quote, the best available technology economically achievable. However, owners of meat and poultry slaughterhouses argue the compliance costs would be too high. Plus, an attorney representing the industry says the EPA did not ask the meat and poultry producers about these newly proposed rules. The EPA's rules, announced in December of 2023, would revise wastewater discharge standards for slaughterhouses to cut nitrogen and phosphorus pollution into U.S. waters. The federal agency held public hearings on the proposal in January, and they will be accepting public comments on it through March 25th. The smog in Los Angeles is getting worse as the EPA is pushing back against a local pollution plan. The EPA is prepared to reject the state's plan, which would make the federal government responsible for 2/3 of the required pollution reductions. Southern California has the strictest air pollution rules in the country, yet has never complied with federal health standards for ozone. State and local air regulators are required to submit plans to the EPA showing how they plan to reduce pollution and comply with federal standards. California air regulators know that the region still needs to reduce smog-forming nitrogen oxides by more than 100 tons per day. That's just to reach the 1997 standard for ozone. This new South Coast Air Quality Management District proposal calls on the federal government to be responsible for 67 tons per day of those cuts, arguing that some of the largest sources of smog-forming emissions are federally regulated, like ships, trains, and aircrafts. But in a recent draft response, the EPA has proposed rejecting California's plan, declaring, quote, states do not have the authority under the Clean Air Act or the Constitution to order the federal government to reduce pollution. The EPA has until July 1st to decide whether it will reject it. If the state and local air regulators fail to submit a plan that the EPA finds acceptable within that time, the federal government could withhold billions of dollars in highway funding, place strict requirements on new permits, and even impose a federal plan to curb the smog. Turning now to the Middle East, where the unrest may be having a major impact not only on the shipping industry, but also on the environment. The growing area of concerns centering on the Houthi rebels of Yemen and their attacks against vessels in the Red Sea. To avoid entanglements with the Iran-backed Houthis, many shipping companies are now having their boats take longer routes to Europe and America, which could have a major impact on the world's oceans. Joining us now to discuss is retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Blaine Holt. Blaine Holt, thank you for coming in. We appreciate it.
Great to be back with you.
So ever since the Houthi rebels of Yemen started attacking vessels in the Red Sea, the global shipping industry, it's been disrupted. Now, is an invisible victim of this conflict the environment?
Oh, no, it absolutely is. It's very, very impactful because the ships that can no longer get through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal must go all the way down to South Africa and then make their way back up. That's an additional 4,300 miles of sailing. So when you think about all of the fuels that are going to be burned in those ships that have to go the extra miles, and then let's focus on the impact right there in the war zone. When the Houthis take out a ship or when they blow one up, like they've hit several tankers that have fuel and gas on board. So when they hit these things and they explode, it's not good for the environment when you see gasoline openly getting blown up into the atmosphere. So, you know, the United States and its coalition partners, they need to be a lot more aggressive about shutting this down. This idea that the United States Navy has its hands full with a peer competitor in the Houthis is absolutely ridiculous. So if for the folks who are very, very climate minded, this ought to be an element that they should be looking into. And economically, it's very painful.
Is there anything that the shipping industry is specifically doing to combat the extra emissions?
Yep. So there's a lot of things that the shipping industry is doing to try to, first off, they're trying to harden their ships and put security teams on board for if they are going to try to make a run at the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. But it's extremely difficult for them in any case to get shipping insurance. If you don't have insurance on a ship and its cargo, you're essentially not sailing. Another thing that they're doing is we're seeing a slowdown in the supply chains themselves. So if there's a ship that's partially loaded out of Ningbo or Shanghai, it's going to sit until it gets a full load of cargo, because it's just economically not worth it if they've got to reroute that ship around Cape Horn.
So we know that the administration and the shipping industry, they've recently introduced new sort of rules that would ideally lower the amount of emissions that they send out by 30% by the year 2030. With all that's going on right now, is that still a goal that we should feel confident about?
I get very concerned when they put these arbitrary dates out there. By 2030, we're going to do this. By 2035, we're going to do this, without any regard for the second and third order effects. Hard lines on climate targets and goals are really, really irresponsible.
General Blaine Holt, thank you for coming on.
Great to be with you.
Coming up, a new environmental rule gets the green light in the U.S. Stay tuned. We'll talk about America's latest effort to protect the planet when we return. The U.S. is continuing to take steps in hopes of improving the planet's health. The Environmental Protection Agency recently finalized stronger standards for soot pollution. The EPA's new rule aims to cut particulate matter by 25% from 12 micrograms per cubic meter to 9 micrograms per cubic meter. The agency says the stricter policy could help prevent roughly 4,500 premature deaths and hundreds of thousands of lost workdays as the microscopic particles emitted from construction sites, smokestacks, tailpipes, and wildfires can be linked to a number of serious illnesses, including heart disease and asthma. However, a recent study from Oxford University finds the EPA's new rule could hamper the American economy, reducing the U.S. gross domestic product by about $87 billion and harming over 300,000 jobs. Joining us now to discuss is the former Chief of Staff at the U.S. EPA, Mandy Gunasekara. Mandy, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, great to be with you.
So first, the EPA just updated the country's national ambient air quality standards. What exactly are they?
So the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS, as we say for short, monitors the presence of 6 main pollutants. This ranges from things like nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, ozone to PM, and a few others. And EPA has been tracking the presence of these pollutants since 1970. And the standards are set, if you're following the book, which is set out in the Clean Air Act, they're set every 5 years. EPA is supposed to set a standard, and then every 5 years they review the science, the latest and greatest technical understanding around those standards, how it's having an impact, positive or negative, and then determine whether or not to lower those standards. And so what you've seen here is the latest rendition of EPA reviewing standards and then deciding to lower them. Now, I will say this, when I was at EPA in 2020, we had actually finalized the 12 microgram standard. And after looking at the comprehensive scientific analysis and taking into account technical realities, decided to maintain the standard. There's a lot more to it, but that's where we are right now, and that's generally speaking what the NAAQS are.
The EPA is saying that this new policy, it will support economic growth. A lot of critics are saying, whoa, we aren't positive about that. Can you explain a little bit further about what these opponents are saying, and why else could this have such a big impact on the economy?
Yeah, well, when you set a new NAAQS standard, the states have to submit plans to EPA to show how they are going to comply with the new standard. And the way that this is really looked at is either by county or by metropolitan area. If you think about Atlanta, Atlanta is a number of counties, and so they assess pollution from a metropolitan area that includes a number of counties. But what the states have to do, they have to come up with a plan of how they will comply with this new standard. And the problem from an economic development perspective is if that gets so low, you cannot expand businesses. You cannot bring in new industrial activity. You cannot let life continue as it does, even with the latest and greatest technologies. You just cannot let that happen without significant costs. So at the end of the day, it's a convoluted route whereby regulations really increase the everyday price of moving around by virtue of impacting the cost of energy and goods that are dependent on transportation and infrastructure and economic development writ large.
A policy like this, and most things in life, it all boils down to compromise, right? So concerning environmental policy, especially for these new air quality standards, we're once again pitting a healthy planet against a strong economy. So what ways can we move beyond these two necessities that are constantly at odds with one another?
Yeah, well, that's such a great question. It doesn't have to be at odds. And I would say that during the Trump administration, we actually proved this. We cut regulations. We reduced the cost of regulations on all sorts of businesses, small, medium, and large, across the United States to the tune of $1 billion. But emissions continued to fall. Water continued to get cleaner. We transitioned a lot of long-term pollution sites called Superfund sites out of that status into positions where they were cleaned up and they were able for use and economic development and whatnot. And so you don't have to make this choice. And I would say that's particularly the case with the PM 2.5 standard. We just did the analysis in 2020 when we were considering the spectrum of scientific perspective and insight and experience, and we landed on maintaining the current standard. And the current standard is really good. We're 6% below global standards and much better than most other industrialized countries. And then we should make sure we're fostering economic development and growth here in the United States that's done consistent with the gold standard of environmental regulations and not pushing that out to places like China, where their production means pollution that floats over and makes life harder for our West Coast.
All right, Mani Gunasakara, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your expertise on this matter.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Coming up, a group of oceanographers is headed to uncharted depths. We'll have more on what they hope to find and how it may help some species that are in decline. Stay tuned. A pioneering expedition to discover new species in one of the most remote parts of the deep ocean is taking place in New Zealand. Alex Salvi has more.
Scientific foundations from around New Zealand are banding together for an expedition to search for new species deep in the ocean. The Ocean Census Team is leading a 21-day mission off the coast, traveling depths of 16,000 feet into uncharted waters.
Discovering species in the ocean is really urgent. Global climate change and regional and local stresses such as overfishing, plastic pollution are causing huge changes in marine life and a huge decline in many marine species.
The goal is to discover and protect tens of thousands of new species, many of which threatened by climate change and biodiversity crises. 10,000 miles of stunning coastline and a sea-rich environment makes New Zealand the ideal location for maritime research.
This is a really underexplored area of the New Zealand Exclusive Economic Zone. We are going to discover, hopefully, if this goes well, hundreds of new species on our voyage.
The crew will use state-of-the-art equipment to overcome changes in pressure at depths that few humans have ever experienced. Using deep-sea camera systems, they hope to uncover more about the roughly 2 million species estimated to inhabit the ocean, with only around 10% being discovered.
We are already seeing distributions of species changing. We're seeing things that we know turn up in different places and move south as warming waters encroach. And so we can't measure those changes if we don't know what we have.
There's a high bar set for the expectations, with this elite collection of scientists confident they will not only return with a plethora of discoveries, but an opportunity to implement real change.
Our success of this voyage is going to be returning with a whole bunch of buckets of samples that we can then examine here in the lab, which will be like Christmas coming all at once.
The 3-week journey is seen as an expedition and a rescue mission, with the outcome being life or death for thousands of species. For EarthX, I'm Alex Salvi.
Alex Salvi, thank you. And before we leave you, a heartwarming and historic moment at the world's oldest zoo. Staffers are celebrating after 4 tiny Vosseler two-horned chameleons successfully hatched at the Schönbrunn Zoo in Vienna, Austria. The adorable newborns are the offspring of 2 endangered rainforest chameleons who were rescued from animal traffickers at the Vienna airport 3 years ago. This type of chameleon is native to East Africa, but researchers say illegal capture and habitat loss have played a role in their declining numbers. Zoo officials say the births are an important contribution to the preservation of the species. And footage of 2 bald eagles protecting their nest is going viral. Parents Jackie and Shadow are racking up a whole lot of fans on social media as the 2 birds tend to their 3 eggs in Southern California. Friends of Big Bear Valley started the live stream a few months ago, and since then, it has taken off in popularity. At last check, the live stream had nearly 250,000 subscribers. Now, eagle eggs, they take around 35 days to incubate. Eagle watchers will want to keep an eye out for any signs of a pip, which is the first hole the eaglet makes in the shell when it's starting to hatch. That's it for this edition of EarthX News. Please join us again next week. I'm Christina Thompson.